What if everything you thought you knew about the royal family was a lie? What if the very institution Prince Harry and Meghan Markle ran from, the monarchy they accused of coldness, racism, and manipulation, held the key to their children's future? What if, in her final days, Queen Elizabeth II quietly orchestrated one final move, a move that would bring Harry and Meghan back to the very land they vowed to leave behind? This isn't just another royal drama. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. This is the story of a hidden £20 million trust fund, a last will that wasn't supposed to go public, and two children, Archie and Lilibet, caught in the tug-of-war between royal duty and personal freedom. And it begins not in front of flashing cameras or palace steps, but in a quiet, oak-paneled chamber inside Windsor Castle, where Prince William read a line from the Queen's sealed will that would send shockwaves through the House of Windsor and all the way to Montecito, California. Because what was written in that will, it didn't just shake the foundations of the royal family. It forced Prince Harry and Meghan Markle to do the unthinkable, to turn around and run back to the very crown they rejected. But not for themselves. No, this time, it was for their children. And what came next would flip everything we know about the Sussexes, the Queen's final wishes, and the monarchy itself. Because this inheritance, it wasn't unconditional. It came with a clause, a demand, a line so specific, so personal, so calculated, that even King Charles allegedly questioned whether it had really come from his mother. But it had, and that one line changed everything. Let's rewind. For years, the world has watched Harry and Meghan's relationship with the royal family unravel in full public view. From the fairy tale wedding to the fiery fallout. From the Oprah bombshells to Netflix docuseries drama. From Meghan's podcast digs to Harry's tell-all memoir Spare, laced with accusations against his brother, his father, and the entire institution of monarchy. They left the UK in a blaze of headlines and heartbreak. They made a home in California, signed million-dollar deals, built Archwell, raised Archie and Lilibet away from the press, the pressure, and the palace walls. They told the world they were free. They said they didn't need the monarchy. They said they'd never go back. But here's the twist. Queen Elizabeth, stoic, wise, and always 10 steps ahead, may have never believed them. Because while the media was focused on Prince Andrew's scandals and Harry's press appearances, something was happening behind closed doors. Something no one reported. Something only a few trusted aides knew. The Queen was writing a personal clause into her private will. A clause that would set the future of Archie and Lilibet in stone. Or so she thought. Because hidden inside that will was a royal inheritance not meant for tabloids or public relations. It was for legacy, for protection, for identity, for blood. A £20 million trust fund reserved for two names only. Archie Harrison Mountbatten-Windsor and Lilibet Diana Mountbatten-Windsor. But there was a catch. They wouldn't see a penny unless they returned to the UK, resided part-time under crown recognition, and were presented to the monarchy. Presented, not visited, not zoomed in. Presented, formally, to the crown. No loopholes, no stand-ins, no delays. And that meant one thing. Meghan and Harry would have to choose. Stay in the freedom of exile, or walk their children straight into the spotlight they tried to escape. Now, here's the most stunning part. Sources close to the palace say the Queen drafted this clause in 2021, right after Harry and Meghan's Oprah interview. Yes, the same interview where Meghan claimed there were concerns and conversations about how dark Archie's skin might be. The same interview where Harry admitted his father stopped taking his calls. And yet, even then, even amid the firestorm, Elizabeth II was planning an inheritance. Not for her grandson, but for her great-grandchildren. Not as a reward, but as a tether. A way to ensure that, no matter what, the royal bloodline would not drift too far into the California sun. And if that sounds cold or calculated, consider this. Every monarch has one job, preserve the crown. And perhaps, in her final days, the Queen saw that it wasn't Harry who was the future. It was Archie. It was Lilibet. And if those children were lost to another world, another country, another narrative, then the crown lost more than just titles. It lost history, legacy. It lost itself. So, what did Harry and Meghan do when they heard the clause? They panicked. They argued. They negotiated behind closed doors. But eventually, they packed their bags. Because when William read that will aloud in the presence of King Charles, Princess Anne, and the Queen's legal counsel, there was no room for misunderstanding. The clause was final. The clause was binding. And it was clear. If Archie and Lilibet wanted their legacy, if they wanted their piece of the crown's heritage, if they wanted to secure the trust their great-grandmother had carved out for them, they would need to return. But here's where it gets murky. Meghan and Harry didn't just return to the UK for a family reunion. They didn't land at Heathrow smiling for cameras or waving flags. They came in quiet, strategic, almost undercover. Why? Because this wasn't a homecoming. This was a chess move, and the pieces were just beginning to shift. Now, let me ask you something. If you were Harry, would you have accepted the Queen's condition? Would you put your children back into the same world that nearly tore your wife apart? Or would you walk away from £20 million and risk cutting them off from their birthright? And what if it wasn't just about money? What if walking away meant the monarchy would erase them from history altogether? No titles, no legacy, no recognition, nothing. Could you live with that? Could your children? Because that's the question Meghan and Harry had to face. And it's a question that's now threatening to tear their family apart once again. Because what came next wasn't peaceful. It wasn't gracious. It wasn't warm. It was a power struggle. It was confrontation. It was about control. And when Meghan realized who had helped shape the clause, someone she never suspected, everything exploded behind the palace walls. But that's coming up. First, we need to go into the room where it all started. The moment Prince William opened the Queen's sealed will and read out a line that changed everything. Have you ever been in a room so silent, so thick with tension, that even the sound of your own breath feels like a violation? That's exactly what it felt like that day inside Windsor Castle. No cameras, no press, no royal fanfare, just an old wooden table, aged portraits watching from the walls, and the remaining members of Britain's most famous and fractured family, sitting in cold, uncomfortable silence. And in the center, a single red leather box, the kind the Queen used for decades to receive her daily dispatches from Parliament. But this wasn't politics. This was personal, deeply personal. Inside that box was Queen Elizabeth II's final will and testament. And Prince William, heir to the throne, was the one chosen to read it aloud. Why William? Because, according to palace insiders, the Queen trusted him with far more than the line of succession. She trusted him with truth, even when that truth might hurt. Even when it might shatter the very foundation of what remained of their already splintered family. That morning, King Charles sat at the head of the long table, stoic, pale, clutching a handkerchief he never used. Beside him, Camilla stared into her lap, barely blinking. Princess Anne sat upright and rigid, her jaw locked with decades of discipline. And at the far end of the table, Prince Edward and Sophie whispered to each other quietly, the only ones showing a flicker of humanity in the room. There were no smiles, no small talk, no "how have you been?" Just the weight of legacy bearing down on everyone. And then came the chime. 11 o'clock sharp. A butler entered with the red box. Set it down. Nodded. Left. No words. No ceremony. Just one task. Deliver the Queen's last instructions to those she left behind. And William, gripping the envelope with trembling fingers, took a breath that felt like the last one he might ever take freely. By order of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, he began, voice low, wavering, but unmistakably firm. Page after page, he read. Bequests to staff. Private letters to lifelong friends. Instructions for how the Queen wanted to be remembered in certain Commonwealth countries. Even minor possessions, down to a brooch, were listed with precision. It was meticulous. It was dignified. It was pure Elizabeth. But then halfway through, William paused. A pause so heavy, it shifted the oxygen in the room. King Charles leaned forward and raised a brow. Even Camilla looked up, as if jolted from a trance. Because the next words out of William's mouth, they weren't expected, they weren't known, and they weren't supposed to exist. To my great-grandchildren, Archie Harrison Mountbatten-Windsor and Lilibet Diana Mountbatten-Windsor. The room froze. Even the chandeliers seemed to stop swaying. I hereby bequeath a private trust, established in their names and protected under the Sovereign Grant Reserve, in the sum of £20 million. A collective inhale. To be held until their 18th birthdays, on the condition that they are dual citizens of the United Kingdom, reside part-time within its borders, and are presented, formally and publicly, to the reigning monarch in accordance with royal tradition. Silence. No one moved, not even the footman outside the door, because everyone knew exactly what those words meant. Harry's children, the ones he and Meghan had spent years shielding from royal titles, from royal duties, from royal life, were now being called back, not with threats, but with legacy, with money, with blood, with identity. So here's the question. Was this a gift or a trap? And more importantly, how did Prince Harry and Meghan Markle hear about it? Because they weren't in that room. They were nearly 5,000 miles away in Montecito, waking up to another California morning of sun and privacy. But across the Atlantic, Meghan's phone buzzed. An encrypted call. A direct line. "It's William," said the voice on the other end. "We've just finished reading the will. You'll want to hear this." And that's when everything changed. Back in the castle, after the initial shock passed, the questions came flooding in. Did the Queen really write that clause herself? Was she coerced? Why wasn't Harry informed earlier? And perhaps the most important question of all, who else knew? Because sources close to the palace suggest that King Charles himself might have been unaware of this private inheritance clause. Which begs the question, was this the Queen's final message to her estranged grandson? A peace offering? Or a reminder? But one person didn't question it. William. According to insiders, William read that portion of the will with a calm certainty that unnerved even Anne. He didn't stutter. He didn't blink. He read it as if he knew it was coming. Did he? Had the Queen confided in him during her final days? Had she entrusted her golden grandson with her final, personal mission? We may never know. But what we do know is this. As William closed the final page of the will, folded it neatly, and placed it back inside the red box, the entire room felt like it had aged 10 years. Charles cleared his throat and stood abruptly and walked to the window. Camilla sighed and whispered something under her breath that no one caught. And Prince Edward? He looked directly at William and said only one word. Now what? Let's pause for a moment. Can you imagine what it must have felt like to be Harry and Meghan, hearing that your children's future had just been redefined without your input? What would you do? Would you fight it? Ignore it? Or would you take the bait? Because what's at stake isn't just money. It's a re-entry into a system you walked away from. It's choosing between protecting your children from the crown or giving them the crown's protection. Meghan was furious. Insiders say she slammed her phone down, paced the room, and shouted. They waited until she died to pull this. But Harry? He just sat, staring at the wall, silent, processing. Because deep down, some part of him knew. He knew this day might come, that his grandmother, the woman he revered even after leaving, would find a way to tie his children back to her legacy. And now that day was here. Back at Windsor, the meeting dissolved quickly. Charles had royal business to attend to. Camilla disappeared into a corridor without a word and refused to speak to anyone. And William? He stayed behind, alone in the room, looking down at the red box. Sources say he lingered there for almost 20 minutes, just staring, not at the will, but at a small photograph tucked inside the lid. It was a faded snapshot of the Queen, holding baby Archie, a moment the world never saw. A private visit during one of Harry and Meghan's last trips to the UK. The Queen, smiling gently. Archie, wrapped in a cream blanket. A bridge between generations. A bond never spoken of again. Until now. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Because just as William was about to leave the room, his phone rang. A private line. The voice on the other end? Harry here. No emotion. No hesitation. Just 5 words. I heard what she wrote. Then silence. A silence that stretched across the Atlantic. And William's response. You need to come back. Harry didn't answer right away. But the seed had been planted. The inheritance was real. The clause was binding. The choice was impossible. And Meghan? She wasn't going to accept this quietly. Because if this was the Queen's final checkmate, Meghan was ready to flip the entire board. But what came next would catch even her off guard. What kind of grandmother hides £20 million for your children? And doesn't tell you? What kind of queen writes a secret clause that pulls your entire life and your children's future back into the very monarchy you fought to escape? And most of all, why now? That's the question that consumed Prince Harry in the hours and days after the will was read aloud. Because this wasn't just a will. It was a detonator, one that had been quietly ticking for years. And it finally went off. But let's go back, before the shock, before the clause. Before Harry even knew this trust fund existed. Because that's where the Real story begins. Not in Windsor Castle, but in the shadows of the Crown's most discreet financial operations.